The Mississippi heat clung to everything like a wet shroud. In the summer of 1953, the cicadas never stopped screaming, and the air inside the Jensen house never moved. It was a three-story Victorian relic buried under ivy, its white paint flaking like sunburned skin, its shutters drooping like tired eyelids. At the edge of the woods, the house stood quiet, still and watchful. Too still. 8-year-old Molly Jensen sat barefoot on the wide porch steps, humming softly and staring into the pine trees. Her dress was too large, a hand-me-down from her cousin. Her hair was tangled, dusty with pollen. She held a worn porcelain doll in one hand and a broken pencil in the other. With each motion, she scratched little spirals into the wood beneath her, quiet symbols that only she understood. Inside the house, her mother, Catherine, was ironing laundry with the radio low. Her father, Mark, read the newspaper in silence, the same way he always did, slow, eyes fixed, unreadable. No one talked much in the Jensen household, but Molly, she talked a lot, just not to them. She talked to Sarah. Sarah wasn't allowed inside during the day. Molly had rules. Sarah had rules too, but they were different. Sarah didn't like the sun. She liked mirrors and shadows and dark corners where the floorboards groaned just enough to whisper her name. Molly wasn't afraid of her, not yet. "Sarah says you don't like me," Molly said one morning at breakfast, her voice soft and serious. Mark glanced up from his eggs, blinking behind thick glasses. "Who says that?" "Sarah." He looked at Catherine, who gave him that sharp, warning glance. They'd talked about this already. Don't encourage it. It's just a phase. But Mark was old-school Mississippi, firm, distant, and afraid of anything he couldn't see. "There's no Sarah here, Molly, it's just you," he said. Molly didn't answer. She just looked past him, toward the tall mirror in the hallway, and she smiled. If you're drawn to eerie stories where the line between imagination and reality fades, subscribe now. We bring you real tales that chill and haunt long after they're over. That week, Molly drew 2 little girls over and over again, on napkins, on pages torn from hymnals, on the margins of her spelling workbook. One was her, she always made sure of that. Red bow, crooked teeth, smudge of freckles. The other girl had no face, just long black hair and blacker eyes. Her name, always written beside her in curving loops, Sarah. Catherine noticed. One evening, while folding sheets, she asked, "Why does Sarah have no face, sweetie?" Molly didn't look up. "Because she hasn't chosen one yet." That night, Catherine dreamed of children crying in the walls. She woke soaked in sweat. The Jensen house was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It was the kind of silence that pressed on your eardrums, as if the house were holding its breath. The 3rd floor had been locked since they moved in. Mark said it was unsafe, the stairs too weak, but Molly had already found a way in. She didn't need keys. Sarah showed her a different route. There was a vent in her bedroom closet. It creaked open when you leaned on it just right. Upstairs was dust and cobwebs and furniture under sheets. Molly didn't care. This was where Sarah played. They had tea parties with broken cups. They whispered to each other in rhymes Molly didn't remember learning. Sometimes Molly would sit completely still for hours, listening. "Sometimes," Sarah whispered back. "At school, things weren't easier. The other children kept their distance. Molly didn't play at recess. She muttered, she stared. She once pushed a boy off the swing set when he touched her doll. When asked why, she only said, 'Sarah told me to.' The teacher, Miss Downing, wrote a note home. Catherine tore it up. Molly had always been sensitive. She used to cry when the dog barked too loud or when the radio static came on. Catherine chalked it up to imagination, loneliness, the move. The house was old, yes, but charming in its way. The land was peaceful, or so she told herself. But that week she found Molly outside at midnight. She was barefoot, in her nightgown, standing just at the tree line with her arms outstretched. Her eyes were closed. She was singing. Catherine froze on the porch, heart thundering. The song had no words, just an eerie, lilting melody that rose and fell like a lullaby from another time. A tune she'd never heard before. It didn't sound like Molly. She called her name. Molly didn't answer. When Catherine reached her and touched her shoulder, Molly opened her eyes, but they didn't look like Molly's, not exactly. She wanted me to see her woods, Molly said, as if explaining something simple. She says they belong to her now. And with that, she walked back inside without another word. Catherine didn't sleep that night. Molly Jensen didn't make friends at school. Children avoided her, whispering when she passed, mimicking her under their breath. Sarah says this. Sarah wants that. One boy tried to mock her once, calling her Ghost Girl on the playground. Molly didn't respond. She just smiled at him, a slow, cold smile, then whispered something no one else heard. The boy didn't come to school the next day. When he returned, he refused to look Molly in the eyes. He said she talked in his sleep. At home, Molly spent hours in her room with the door shut tight. Her mother would pass by and hear her voice, soft and steady, as if she were reading aloud. Sometimes she laughed, but there was no book, no toy, no radio, just her and the mirror on the far wall. Catherine caught her once. The door creaked open just enough to glimpse Molly sitting cross-legged, her hands in her lap, head tilted. She was speaking directly to the mirror. "I can't go with you yet," she said, her voice low, "but I will when I'm ready." The mirror was antique, tall, silver-framed, warped around the edges. It had belonged to Mark's grandmother, part of the house's original furnishings. Catherine had never liked it. There was something off about the reflection, something too slow in the way light moved across its surface. It didn't feel like a reflection. It felt like a window. "Molly," Catherine said, pushing the door wider. "Who are you talking to?" Molly turned around. Her expression didn't change. "Sarah." "We've talked about this," Catherine said gently, kneeling beside her. "Sarah's not real, honey." Molly looked past her into the mirror. "That's what she wants you to think." That night, Catherine moved the mirror into the attic. The next morning, it was back in Molly's room. Mark swore he hadn't moved it. Catherine stared at the spot on the wall where it now stood, unmoved, untouched, as if it had never been gone. Later that week, strange things began to happen. The mirrors in the house, every one of them, began to fog up for no reason. Even when the rooms were cool and dry, even the compact mirror in Catherine's purse. And sometimes, just as the fog cleared, she swore she saw the outline of a child's hand pressed to the glass. One evening, Catherine found her sewing scissors missing. She searched the drawers, the laundry basket, the kitchen counter. The next morning, they were on Molly's windowsill, open, blades glinting in the light. "Molly, did you take these?" she asked. Molly shook her head. Sarah did. She needed to cut her braid. The dollhouse in Molly's room had changed too. Catherine had built it herself, replica of the Jensen home, complete with painted shutters and tiny brass doorknobs. Now one of the attic windows in the dollhouse was cracked. Inside, a tiny porcelain figure lay face down in the hallway, its limbs twisted, its dress torn. Molly didn't say a word about it. Catherine began locking her bedroom door at night. Mark, ever pragmatic, dismissed the signs. "It's just a phase," he muttered. "She's lonely. She's got too much imagination and not enough discipline." But even he began to feel it, the heaviness in the air, the way the lights flickered just slightly when Molly walked into a room. He wouldn't admit it, not yet, but something was shifting. The turning point came on a Sunday. The Jensens were supposed to visit Mark's brother for lunch. Catherine called for Molly to come down, but there was no answer. She climbed the stairs, found the bedroom empty, the window wide open, curtains fluttering. They found her in the woods again, barefoot, her feet muddy, standing still beneath a tree. "Molly!" Catherine cried. "What are you doing?" Molly blinked slowly, as if waking from a dream. "I was listening." "To what?" "To the song," she whispered. "Sarah sings it when she's sad." They took her home in silence. That night, Catherine sat in Molly's room as she slept. She watched her daughter murmur in her dreams, saw her fingers twitch and curl as if gripping invisible hands. When she leaned close, she could just make out the words. "She's waiting," Molly whispered. "She's coming soon." Catherine didn't sleep at all. The next morning, she opened Molly's notebook from school. The latest drawing wasn't of two girls. It was of a mirror, tall and curved, with two sets of eyes staring out. One was unmistakably Molly's, the other was darker, sunken, with lines etched around the sockets. Both girls had written names beneath them. Molly, Sarah. The walls of the Jensen house were thick, old and strangely alive. At night they made noises, creaks, taps, low groans that seemed to echo from deep inside the structure. Catherine had always chalked it up to the age of the house, the wood settling, the Mississippi humidity warping the beams. But lately the sounds had changed. They weren't random anymore. They had rhythm. Sometimes it sounded like a knock. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 2 more. Always the same. Always from the same wall behind Molly's bed. Catherine pressed her ear to it one morning, half joking with herself, but what she heard made her reel back. It wasn't knocking anymore. It was whispering. Too soft to make out words, but constant, like someone murmuring secrets just beyond the plaster. She told Mark. He laughed it off. "It's just mice." "Then they're very articulate mice," she snapped. He didn't answer. That night Molly came to their room, her nightgown damp with sweat. "Sarah says the whispering will stop if I go with her." Catherine sat up, breath catching. "What does that mean, go with her?" "She says there's a place behind the walls." "She showed me." Mark took Molly back to bed, muttering under his breath, but Catherine couldn't let it go. The next morning, while Molly was at school, she climbed up to the attic and started searching. Dust coated everything. Old trunks, broken chairs, yellowed lace curtains that disintegrated under her touch. In the far corner, behind a stack of boxes, she found an old vent cover. Rusted. Slightly ajar. She pulled it open and stared down the shaft. A narrow tunnel ran along the inner wall, just wide enough for a small child. She dropped her flashlight inside and saw scratches along the wooden slats. Tiny, ragged lines like fingernails had scraped them in panic or frustration. She reached in and pulled out something cold. A button, mother of pearl, child-sized. That same afternoon, Catherine visited the only neighbor who might know something, Mrs. Turney, a woman in her 80s, who lived in the dilapidated farmhouse a quarter-mile down the dirt road. She'd been born in the area. She knew things. Mrs. Turney didn't open the door at first. When she finally did, she looked pale, shaky, her hands trembling. "You're the one who bought the Whittaker house," she said, not asked. "The Jensen house," Catherine corrected. "It was the Whittaker house before it was yours, and it was wrong long before that." Catherine hesitated. "Do you know anything about a girl named Sarah?" Mrs. Turney's face drained of what little color remained. She backed into the shadows. "You shouldn't say that name in that house." "It remembers. What happened to her?" "Gone, like the others, but she stayed. Some children don't know how to leave." Catherine pressed. "You mean she died there?" Mrs. Turney shook her head slowly. "I mean she stayed. She made that house a mouth, and it never stopped feeding. You need to leave." "I can't," Catherine said, her voice firm now. "I need to protect my daughter." "Then watch the walls," the old woman whispered. "They whisper back." Back home, Catherine found Molly sitting by the hallway mirror again, tracing something on the floor with her finger. It looked like symbols, circles crossed by jagged lines, all in perfect symmetry. "Molly," she said, trying to keep calm, "who taught you that?" "Sarah," Molly replied without looking up. "She says they keep the others away." "What others?" Molly turned slowly, her voice almost apologetic. "The ones who whisper too loud." Catherine stared at her daughter, struggling to process what was happening. It was no longer about imagination, no longer a child's fantasy. Something ancient, patient, and hungry was awake in that house, and it had found a voice through her daughter. That night, Mark finally admitted he'd been hearing the knocks too. "I thought it was my mind," he confessed. "But last night I heard someone say my name." They lay in bed, silent, eyes wide, the soft sounds starting again behind the walls. Scratch, scratch, pause, then the murmurs. In the dark, Catherine whispered, "It's not just her anymore." Catherine returned to the attic the next morning with gloves, a crowbar, and quiet determination. She no longer questioned what she was doing. Something in that house had chosen her daughter, and if she had to tear it apart piece by piece to understand why, so be it. She pulled the rotting floorboards near the back wall, where the old vent had revealed its secrets. Dust bloomed like ash. Beneath the boards was a narrow compartment, no bigger than a coffin, lined with cracked wood and matted straw. Someone had used it as a hiding place, long ago. She reached in and found a small leather-bound book, its cover brittle, the edges scorched. It was a diary. The first page was intact. Property of Sarah Whitaker, age 9, 1912. Catherine sat there in the attic light, surrounded by echoes, and began to read. March 4th. I do not like this house. The air tastes sour. The people whisper. The stairs cry. March 16th. Mother says I must not speak at dinner anymore. Father says I'm too curious. But the girl in the walls listens. She has no eyes, but she listens. April 2nd. I told them about the scratching. They laughed, but I saw the mirror flicker. It wasn't my face. The entries grew darker. May 11th. They locked me upstairs for 3 days. I screamed and no one came. I was not alone, though. She was with me. She held my hand. June 5th. I cannot remember my real name anymore. She calls me sister now. She says we will share the same skin. Soon. June 8th. The air is cold even when it is warm. I see other faces in the mirror now. Some cry, some smile. One bites. The final entry, barely legible. June 9th. She says it's time. I'm tired. I think I'll sleep now. Catherine's hands trembled as she closed the diary. She felt sick, the kind of sickness that comes from touching something meant to stay buried. That night, she told Mark everything. The diary, the names, the voices. He didn't argue, he only asked one question. Why would her name be Sarah? Catherine didn't have an answer, but Molly did. I already told you, she said calmly. That's who she is. Molly had been reading the diary too. The next day, Catherine visited the county records office. The building smelled of mildew and old paper, but she found what she was looking for in a bound volume of property transactions. The Jensen house had once belonged to a man named Ernest Whitaker. In 1912, he filed a missing person report for his adopted daughter, Sarah. The file was thin, just a few lines of typed notes. Child disappeared under unknown circumstances, no signs of forced entry. Father claims dark influences, case closed, status, presumed deceased. There were no photographs, no funeral record, just a whisper in the margins of history. But then another name appeared. Addendum, see also Elizabeth Whitaker. Deceased, 1911. Cause, suicide. Sarah's mother. Back home, Catherine pieced together what little she could. The family moved into the house in 1909. Elizabeth died 2 years later, threw herself from the 3rd floor, the very one now locked. A year later, Sarah vanished, and no one spoke of them again. That night, Molly had a nightmare. She screamed until Catherine ran into the room. The bedsheets were tangled, wet with sweat. Molly's eyes were wide and wild. She was crying, she gasped. She couldn't find her face. She tried to take mine again. Again? Catherine asked, stunned. Or what do you mean? She did it before, a long time ago, but I stopped her. Catherine held her close, her mind spinning. What did that mean? Before? In the silence, the walls creaked once more, not randomly, not aimlessly. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 2 more. They were never just sounds, they were answers. The full moon rose over Mississippi like an unblinking eye. It bathed the Jensen house in cold silver light, and the walls seemed to breathe. The air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. Catherine couldn't sleep. Mark snored beside her, restless. Down the hall she heard the floorboards creak, a whisper, then silence. She slipped out of bed and crept toward Molly's room. The door was open. Molly was gone. Panic surged through her. She raced down the stairs, barefoot, heart hammering. The front door hung ajar, swaying in the night breeze. Beyond it, the grass was damp with dew, and the path to the woods shone faintly under moonlight. She found Molly standing barefoot in the clearing again, her nightgown glowing faintly. "Molly," Catherine called, her voice sharp. The girl didn't flinch. She was staring up at the moon, arms limp at her sides. "She says the sky is opening," Molly said softly. "She says that's when I'll be ready." "Ready for what?" Molly turned her head, slow and smooth. "To cross over." Catherine stepped forward and took her hand. It was ice cold. "Sweetheart, let's go back inside." "She's almost strong enough," Molly whispered. She promised we'd go together. Back in the house, Molly didn't resist. She climbed into bed quietly, eyes wide open. Catherine sat beside her, refusing to leave until sleep came. It never did. At some point, Molly just stopped blinking. She stared at the ceiling for hours. In the morning, Catherine begged Mark to believe her. "She's not just pretending, something's happening." "She talks about promises and crossings like they're real." Mark shook his head. "She needs structure, not hysteria. You're feeding into this." "She was outside again last night. She talks about things she shouldn't know." Mark slammed his mug on the table. "She's a child, Catherine, a lonely one, and maybe you are too." The words stung, but she said nothing. That afternoon, the school called. Molly had been caught in the hallway talking to the janitor's closet door, whispering. When the teacher tried to stop her, Molly slapped her hand away and screamed, "She's not done talking yet." They sent her home early. Later that day, Catherine noticed faint scratches on Molly's arms, thin lines fresh just beneath the elbow. "What happened to you?" she asked. "She needed a mark," Molly replied calmly. "To know I was still willing." Catherine's breath caught. "Did someone hurt you?" "No, I did it. For her." Catherine stood there frozen, trying to swallow her panic. "Why, Molly, why would you do that?" "She said I need to bleed before I can see her real face." Mark finally agreed to call someone, not a priest, not yet, but their pastor, Reverend Thorne. He was a tall, soft-spoken man with greying hair and a voice like slow thunder. He arrived with a Bible and a bottle of holy water. "I've been here before," he said, as he entered the house, glancing at the staircase. "Long time ago." "You knew the Whitakers?" Catherine asked. "I knew of them, and I knew this house had a presence." "It always has." He walked room by room, praying under his breath, sprinkling water into the corners. When he reached Molly's bedroom, he paused. She was sitting on the floor, drawing circles on the wood again. "Molly," he said gently, "do you know who I am?" "You're too late," she whispered, not looking up. "Too late for what?" "She's already here." Then, without warning, she screamed and grabbed her head. Her eyes rolled back. Her body convulsed once, violently, then went still. She slumped forward, breathing heavy. Reverend Thorne moved fast, cradling her, praying louder now. Catherine knelt beside them, tears on her cheeks. Molly's eyes fluttered open. "She hates the light," she whispered. "She says the fire inside your words burns." Reverend Thorne looked up at Catherine. "You need to leave this house." Mark was pacing downstairs. "This is madness," he said when Catherine told him. "I'm not abandoning our home." "Then we'll lose her. You're talking like she's possessed. I'm talking like she's disappearing." That night, as the wind howled and the trees scratched the windows, Molly spoke in her sleep again. Her voice was older this time, measured, foreign. "She's the vessel she always was, you just kept forgetting." And then silence. Just before dawn, Catherine checked her daughter's arms again. The scratches had grown deeper. Mark couldn't stand the silence anymore. He stomped through the house with heavy steps, slammed cabinet doors, turned on the radio too loud. Anything to drown out the whispers he now refused to admit he heard. But Catherine knew. He was unraveling. "Send her away," he said one morning, standing in the doorway with bloodshot eyes. "To your sister in Louisiana. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere without mirrors. She's not a suitcase, Mark. She's not our daughter anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke. Catherine looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. "She's still ours, that's why we fight." He said nothing. Just walked out the door. Molly didn't cry, didn't argue. She watched him leave with an empty expression, then returned to her drawings. The circles had become sharper, angular, symbols that made Catherine's skin crawl. When asked what they meant, Molly said, She's teaching me in case she forgets again." Catherine asked who she was now. Molly didn't answer. That afternoon, Catherine called Reverend Thorne again, but he didn't pick up. Instead, she went through old boxes in the basement. Among them, she found a yellowed envelope marked Hospital Archives, June 1871. The house, before becoming a home, had once been a field hospital during the Civil War. Inside the envelope were medical reports, sketches, and one horrifying detail. The upper floors had been used for experimental treatments on orphans brought in after battles, children with no families to claim them. Most died from infection. A few were never logged as deceased, and in the margin of one report, faded but legible, a name appeared in handwriting not from the same pen: Sarah W. Catherine dropped the file. The paper fluttered to the floor. She ran back upstairs where Molly sat motionless in her room. She was humming again, the same tuneless lullaby, over and over. "Where did you learn that?" Catherine asked. "Sarah's mother sang it," Molly said without turning around. "She said it's how you keep the others away." That night, Catherine begged Mark to sit with them. To be present, to try. So he did. He read a book aloud in the living room while Molly sat on the rug and coloured. For a moment, it almost felt normal, peaceful. Then the lights flickered. Molly flinched. "Don't stop reading," she said sharply. Mark blinked. "Why?" "She gets closer when it's quiet." He hesitated, then kept reading, his voice trembling slightly. When he reached the end of the chapter, he looked up. Molly was gone. The front door was wide open. They found her in the shed out back. She stood in the centre, surrounded by shattered glass and dead moths. Her arms were covered in symbols drawn in ash. "She said this is the way," Molly muttered. "The same way she showed them." Catherine scooped her up and carried her inside, whispering apologies, trying to hold back sobs. Mark followed behind, silent. Later that night, he stood by the bathroom mirror, staring at his reflection. He reached out and touched the surface, and it felt warm. He didn't sleep after that. The next day, Reverend Thorne returned Catherine's call. His voice was hoarse, fearful. "I made a mistake," he said. "This isn't possession, it's older than that. It's bonded memory, a haunting that lives through children. It feeds on abandonment." Catherine closed her eyes. "So what do we do?" "Contain it, before it chooses another vessel." He hung up. As Catherine stepped into the hallway, she saw Molly standing at the top of the stairs, facing the third-floor door. "She's behind it," Molly said. "She's waiting for me." "That door's locked," Catherine replied softly. Molly turned, her voice distant. "Not to her." Catherine called out to Mark, who came rushing up the stairs. He grabbed the doorknob to prove it was sealed, and it twisted easily in his hand. The door creaked open. Dust swirled, the air was colder, and somewhere deep inside the darkness beyond, something moved. The third floor had always been locked. The door had remained untouched for years, stiff with layers of paint, sealed like a vault. But now it opened as if it had never been locked at all. No key. No resistance. Catherine stepped through first, flashlight trembling in her hand. The air was dense, filled with a sour dampness that clung to her throat. The hallway was narrower than she remembered. Dust coated everything. There were no light fixtures, no windows, just a long corridor ending in darkness. Molly followed behind, barefoot, unblinking. Mark stayed near the door, unsure whether to step inside. "It's different," Molly whispered. "She's changed it." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked. "She's building her world. It's almost finished." They reached the end of the hallway. A door stood slightly ajar. Catherine pushed it open. Inside was a room neither of them had ever seen on the house's blueprints. It was circular, with cracked wallpaper covered in hundreds of childlike drawings. Some were torn, some burned around the edges. All were of the same two girls, one with bright red bows, one with empty black eyes. Molly walked into the center of the room and knelt. "This is where she lives now," she said. Catherine hesitated. "She—" "Who?" "Sarah." That night, back in her room, Molly drew a map. Not of the house as it was, but of something twisted. The walls were crooked, hallways doubled back on themselves, doors led to nowhere. and at the center was a single spiral, labeled in shaky handwriting, Sarah's room. She showed it to me, Molly said. It's the version of the house that exists inside her. Catherine watched as her daughter carefully shaded parts of the map in black. These are the parts she's sealed, Molly explained. She says if she finishes, no one can leave. The next day, Catherine entered Molly's room and found the mirror had returned. She had removed it twice already, hidden it in the attic. But here it was, tall and gleaming. She approached cautiously, heart pounding. For a moment, her own reflection stared back. Then, something flickered behind it. A second face, smaller, paler, staring. She gasped and backed away. Molly didn't react. She watches through that one, Molly said. It's her favorite. Mark refused to enter the room after that. He spent more and more time outside, working in the garden until long after sundown. He didn't speak during meals, he didn't ask questions, but Catherine saw the signs. The way he jumped when the floor creaked, the way he avoided mirrors. One evening, Catherine found Molly in the upstairs hallway, kneeling before a vent. She was whispering into it. "She's sleeping now," she said when Catherine approached, "but she wants me to come soon." "Come where?" Catherine asked. "To her world." "You can't go with her, Molly." "She says I already have." Catherine couldn't sleep that night. She lay awake, listening to the soft knocks that had returned. 3, pause, 2. Always the same. Only now they came from behind the mirror in Molly's room. In the morning, Molly didn't speak. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her skin looked paler. At breakfast, she just sat with her hands folded, staring into nothing. Catherine tried to reach her. "Do you remember your birthday's coming?" Molly blinked slowly. "She says I don't need birthdays anymore." That day, while Molly was at school, Catherine returned to the third-floor room. She brought a hammer and crowbar this time. She started tearing the wallpaper down. Behind the drawings were strange carvings in the plaster, symbols etched deep, like a child had scratched them in panic. She snapped photos, copied some onto paper, and took them to the church. But Reverend Thorne wasn't there. No one had seen him in days. Back at the house, Mark finally spoke. "If we don't stop this," he said quietly, "we'll lose her completely." Catherine nodded. Later that night, Molly sat in bed, rocking slightly. Her lips moved, but no sound came. When Catherine leaned close, she caught the end of a sentence. "And when the glass opens, she'll step through." The storm rolled in just after dusk, thick with lightning and air so humid it tasted like metal. The sky cracked in half and the house seemed to shudder. Rain pounded the windows like fists. Molly was missing again. Catherine and Mark searched every room, every closet, every shadow, the attic, the basement, the third floor. Nothing. Then, from upstairs, a sound like glass breaking. They followed it to Molly's room. The mirror, that mirror, had shattered into jagged shards across the floor. In the center of the wreckage, Molly stood barefoot, her eyes glazed, blood trailing from a cut on her hand. She didn't react. Catherine rushed to her. "Molly! Baby, are you hurt?" Molly blinked slowly, as if waking up. "She opened it," she whispered. "I told her I wasn't ready, so she got angry." Mark stepped forward, his voice trembling. "You broke the mirror?" "No," Molly said. She did. From the other side, they wrapped her hand, swept the shards, but that night more mirrors cracked. The hallway mirror, the bathroom cabinet, even the tiny glass oval in Catherine's locket split down the center. Each time, no sound, just sudden silence, then sharp lines crawling across the surface. And then came the voices. Mark was the first to hear them. He was brushing his teeth when he caught movement in the fogged mirror. Not just a shape, but a girl watching. When he turned around, no one was there. When he looked back, a word had formed in the condensation. "Stay." He smashed the mirror with his fist, didn't even feel the glass. Downstairs, Catherine heard a knock at the back door. She opened it slowly. No one stood there, but on the porch, resting perfectly still, was Molly's old porcelain doll, the one she'd buried weeks ago under the oak tree. Its face was cracked, just like the mirror's. She didn't bring it inside. That night, Molly began speaking in her sleep again, but it wasn't her voice. It was deeper, drawn out with syllables that didn't belong to the English language. Catherine recorded it on a small cassette, played it back the next day. The words twisted the air, electronics hissed, lights dimmed. When she rewound it to listen again, the tape was blank. By the end of the week, Molly had stopped eating. She sat motionless at the kitchen table while Catherine begged her to try something, anything. "She feeds me now," Molly said. "I don't need yours." The lines between reality and Sarah's world were dissolving. Catherine entered the third floor again and found the drawings had changed. New ones had been added, but these weren't done in childlike strokes. They were detailed, anatomical, faces pulled inside out, eyes drawn with surgical precision. One picture showed a girl climbing through a shattered mirror. Her eyes looked like Molly's. When Catherine showed the drawing to Mark, he didn't speak. He just picked up the Bible from the nightstand and held it in shaking hands. "She's not just visiting anymore," he said. "She's staying." That evening, Catherine caught Molly standing in front of her bedroom wall, touching the faded wallpaper gently, humming the lullaby. "I saw her world again," she said. "It's so big now. She says she made room for me." "And what do you say?" Catherine asked. "I don't have to say anything," Molly replied. "I'm already there." That night, Catherine and Mark boarded up every mirror, hammered planks of wood across the frames, stuffed sheets under doors. They sat in the hallway outside Molly's room listening. She talked through the night, voice rising and falling like waves, laughing once, low, hollow laughter that didn't belong in a child's mouth. Just before sunrise, something shattered in the hallway behind them. They turned and saw that one of the boarded mirrors had burst outward. Splinters of glass sprayed across the wall. Inside the broken frame, something moved, not a reflection, a figure. Small hands, a pale face, eyes too deep. Then it was gone. Catherine fell to her knees. "We have to end this," she said. "Now." Catherine drove to Mrs. Turney's house with hands clenched tight on the steering wheel. The roads were slick from the storm. Trees leaned low, branches brushing the windshield. She didn't call ahead. She didn't need to. Somehow she knew the old woman would be waiting. Mrs. Turney opened the door before Catherine knocked. "You finally came," she said. Catherine stepped inside, eyes scanning the cluttered space. Candles burned in corners. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling. Every mirror in the house was covered in black cloth. "You knew," Catherine said, voice hard. "You knew what Sarah was, what she did." Mrs. Turney nodded slowly. "I knew her." "What do you mean?" "I knew her before, when we were children. I lived in that house too." Catherine stared. "My mother worked for the Whitakers. I stayed in the servant quarters, played upstairs when no one watched. Sarah was my friend." "Then why didn't you warn us?" "I tried," Mrs. Turney whispered, "but no one listens when you say you saw something unnatural. They say it's grief, madness, but Sarah, she was never just a child. What happened to her? She found something in that house, something that wanted to be remembered. It took hold of her, spoke through her. And when the Whitakers tried to lock her away, it fed on her anger, her loneliness. That's how it lives, through children left behind." Catherine's voice broke. "It's using my daughter." "No," Mrs. Turney said. "It is your daughter, for now." She limped to a shelf and retrieved a leather-bound book, thick and heavy with mold. "This belonged to my grandmother. Old Southern rites, some true, some dangerous." Catherine opened it, flipping through the pages. Symbols leapt from the parchment, familiar shapes she'd seen on Molly's walls. "What does this do?" "It can sever the bond," the old woman said, "but it comes at a cost." Catherine didn't ask what kind. Back at the house, the storm had passed, but the silence felt worse. Molly sat in the corner of the living room, unmoving. Her eyes were wide, but she didn't blink. Mark knelt beside her. "Molly, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Her lips moved slightly, forming silent syllables. Then she spoke, low, precise. "She's found the key." Mark looked up. "What does that mean?" But Molly was gone again. That night, Catherine laid out the grimoire on the dining table and began copying the ritual: salt, fire, binding cloth. Her hands shook. Mark stood behind her, arms crossed. "You believe this will fix her?" "I believe we've run out of other options." At midnight, Molly began to hum, the same song, over and over. Her hands drew circles on the floor in chalk, symbols Catherine had seen in the attic. "She's getting ready," she said softly. "For what?" Mark asked. "For me to leave." Later, while Catherine gathered candles from the pantry, Molly appeared beside her silently. "She told me what you're doing," she said. Catherine froze. "She said you'll try to cut her out of me, but if you do, she'll find someone else." "She's lying." Molly's eyes narrowed. "She doesn't lie. You do." And she turned away. Mark stood in the kitchen doorway. "She's already inside too deep. Then we dig her out." The house creaked around them, every sound amplified. The walls pulsed faintly. The mirror frames groaned under their wooden boards. At 3 a.m., Catherine prepared the ritual. She marked a circle in the third-floor room, the room that wasn't on any blueprint. She lit the candles, chanted softly. Molly stood in the center, silent, watching her with a calm that wasn't hers. "I need you to fight," Catherine said. "She already did," Molly whispered. "You just weren't listening." The flame nearest the mirror sputtered, the shadows twisted. And then a voice, high, cracked, ancient and young all at once, echoed through the floorboards. "Deal made. Debt owed." Catherine didn't stop, even as the walls began to bleed. The next morning, Catherine woke to the sound of wood splitting. She followed it to the kitchen and found the floorboards near the pantry cracked, the edges blackened. Mark stood over the opening, pale and breathless. "There's something underneath," he said, "a room." Together they pried up the boards. A narrow stone staircase led down into the dark. The air smelled of mildew, rot, and something older, something that hadn't breathed in a long time. They descended with flashlights and a lantern, each step groaning beneath their weight. The root cellar stretched wider than expected, larger than the footprint of the kitchen. Its walls were lined with old shelves and rotting crates. But in the far corner something else emerged, a child's bed frame rusted with time. Scattered toys, a singed rocking horse, the charred outline of a child's drawing on the wall, two figures holding hands. Catherine stared. This was Sarah's room. Molly, who had followed silently behind, stepped forward. She lived here when she wasn't allowed upstairs. "What do you mean?" Catherine asked. She said they called it a punishment, but she called it a promise. Mark crouched beside a half-buried trunk. Inside were brittle bones, small, cracked, wrapped in old lace. No marker, no coffin, just a forgotten grave under the house. He dropped the lid and backed away. "That's her," Catherine whispered. "No," Molly said. "That's what's left of her body." "But she's not there anymore." The candle flickered in Catherine's hand. The walls breathed again. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. Darkness fell. Molly didn't flinch. "She doesn't want you to leave," she said. "She wants to finish what she started." Catherine lit a match, then another candle. "What did she start, Molly?" "She wanted to be remembered," Molly said, voice flat. "And then she wanted more." Mark searched the walls for another way out. "We're not staying here," he muttered. Catherine sat beside Molly. "Look at me," she said. Molly's eyes didn't meet hers. "Do you know who you are?" There was silence, then a whisper. "She says I'm both of us now." "No, you're my daughter. She says I always was." The shadows deepened. Catherine pulled the binding cloth from her pocket. "We're going to end this, right here, in her room." She began the chant from the grimoire, drawing symbols in salt around Molly's feet. Her voice trembled but did not stop. Molly screamed. Not her voice. It echoed, splintered. Sarah's voice overlapped her own, pleading, demanding, commanding. The cellar shuddered. The walls pulsed with movement. From the corner, the old mirror, dusted, cracked, flared with sudden light. "She's coming," Molly cried. "Then let her hear me," Catherine shouted. She poured oil across the symbols and lit them. The fire hissed as it formed a ring. Inside, Molly collapsed. The mirror cracked. Mark ran to lift his daughter, but the air pushed him back. A wind howled from nowhere. Then silence. Catherine stepped forward. "I know your name, Sarah Whitaker. I know what they did to you. I know you were forgotten. But she is not your body, not your voice. Let her go." The flames dimmed. In the flickering light, Molly lifted her head. "I didn't want to be alone," she said. Catherine knelt, tears falling. "You're not alone. You never were." Molly's eyes fluttered shut, and then she whispered, in her own voice, "She's gone." The cellar door creaked open on its own just after dawn. Dust filtered down through the beam of sunlight that cut across the stairs. Catherine carried Molly out, wrapped in blankets, her body limp but breathing. They said nothing for hours. Molly slept. Catherine sat beside her, whispering prayers she didn't know she believed. Mark stood by the mirror in their bedroom, staring at the faint crack that had appeared across the center. It hadn't been there yesterday. He touched it. It was warm. That night, thunder rumbled again in the distance, but the rain never came. The house held its breath. Molly woke screaming. She clutched her head, thrashing, her voice shrill. No words, only raw pain. Catherine rushed to hold her down, but something shifted. Molly's eyes opened, and they weren't hers anymore. They were hollow, familiar. Sarah had returned. "No," Catherine whispered. "You're gone." But Sarah's voice poured from Molly's mouth, slower now, deliberate. "You sealed the room." "Not the mirror." Mark burst into the room, heart racing. "We destroyed your place." "Not all of it," Sarah said through clenched teeth. "She brought me too close. I live in the glass now." Catherine stepped back. "Then we'll burn it." Sarah tilted Molly's head. "You'd burn her too." The mirror in the hallway cracked down the middle with a deafening snap. Then the next, and the next. All the mirrors in the house broke in unison. Light bulbs burst. The walls groaned. The house was splitting open from the inside. Molly screamed again. Her body convulsed. "Do something!" Catherine yelled. Mark grabbed the grimoire and ran to the study, flipping pages, searching for the binding ritual. His fingers trembled. The pages curled at the edges, as if resisting his touch. Then he found it. A second passage, to unbind what clings to flesh, break its gate from within. He looked at the illustration. A mirror, a flame, a hand pulling something free. "I have to enter," he whispered. "What are you saying?" Catherine asked as he returned to the room. "She's in the mirror and it's still open. I have to go in, pull her out." "That's insane. She'll kill Molly if we wait." "You said it yourself. This house is a mouth. I'm going to choke it." He kissed her forehead, stepped back, then turned to the mirror. The reflection stared back, fractured, but it shifted. Beyond it, something moved. Mark raised his hand. The air rippled. His fingers passed through. Catherine screamed. He stepped inside. For a moment, there was silence. Molly collapsed. The mirror darkened. Then shattered. A wave of air burst outward, throwing Catherine to the floor. The room spun, her ears rang. When the dust cleared, the mirror was gone. So was Mark. Molly lay unconscious on the floor. Catherine crawled to her, trembling. "Molly," she whispered, touching her face. "Molly, come back." A breath, then another. Her eyes opened. She blinked once, and then cried, real tears. The house was finally quiet. No creaking walls, no whispers, no shattering glass. Catherine sat beside Molly's bed, watching the rise and fall of her daughter's breath. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a long sigh. The storm had passed, but Mark was gone. Gone without a trace, no body, no sound, only the shattered mirror and a coldness that hadn't left the hallway since. Catherine didn't cry that night. She couldn't. Her body was numb, her mind hollow. Molly stirred at dawn. "Mom," she whispered. Catherine sat up fast, clutched her hand. "I'm here." "She's not," Molly said. "She's really gone." "Are you sure?" Molly nodded. It's quiet inside. It hasn't been quiet in a long time. They left the house that morning. Catherine didn't lock the door. She didn't look back. By afternoon, a crew arrived to assess the damage. The structure had shifted, the foundation unstable. They said parts of the floor had warped from internal pressure. One of them said it looked like the walls had breathed. When they reached the root cellar, they found it collapsed entirely. No bones, no toys, no signs of what had once lived beneath the kitchen. Catherine never asked for them to dig further. Later that week, Molly returned home from her first therapy session. "I don't remember all of it," she told Catherine, "but I remember the dark. I remember wanting to leave and not being able to. Like I was stuck in a dream someone else was having." Catherine nodded. "You don't have to remember everything." But she did, and so did Catherine. The third floor of the house was sealed. The mirror room boarded shut. They didn't sell the house, they didn't return, they simply let it rot. Catherine moved them to a small cottage in Oxford, quiet and green, with no mirrors in the bedrooms. Just sunlight and silence. Molly began drawing again, but now she drew birds, trees, winding rivers. One morning, Catherine found her humming the old lullaby, the one Sarah used to sing. "Where did you hear that?" she asked. Molly looked up, confused. "You sang it to me." Catherine froze. "No," she said softly. "I didn't." They stared at each other. Neither spoke again of it. 1 week later, the back corner of the Jensen house caved in. The old support beams gave way during a rainstorm, collapsing half the third floor. A neighbor saw the chimney fall, the bricks crumbling like ash. No one was hurt. No one was home. The authorities said the house had been unstable for years, recommended demolition. Catherine signed the papers without hesitation. Before they leveled it, she returned once, alone. She stood in the foyer, flashlight in hand, and walked to the mirror where it had all ended. Nothing remained but dust and cobwebs. The glass was gone. The frame blackened. Still, she swore she heard a voice. Soft, familiar. She was mine, and then it was gone. The new house smelled of cedar and fresh paint. No creaking boards, no cold drafts, no hidden staircases. Catherine chose it deliberately. Modern, single-story, all open spaces. The mirrors were small and mounted high, nothing wide enough to catch a full reflection. It was a beginning. Molly adjusted slowly. Her days were quiet, filled with puzzles, walks to the nearby creek, and afternoons spent drawing beneath the oak tree. Her therapist, a woman named Dr. Ellison, said she was progressing well. Reconnection, reintegration, recovery. But Catherine knew some wounds healed beneath the skin, where no one could see. One afternoon, Molly came home with a paper crown and a handful of wildflowers. "Today we talked about families," she said. "I drew you." She held up a crayon portrait, Catherine in a blue dress, Molly in red beside her. "And who's this?" Catherine asked, pointing to a third figure. "That's Dad," Molly said. Catherine's breath caught. "He's watching from the sky," Molly added. "He helps the birds fly." That night, Catherine opened the old diary, the one Sarah had kept. It had survived the move, tucked away in a locked chest. She wasn't sure why she brought it. Maybe she needed to remember. Maybe she feared forgetting. She read the entries again. Each line still carried the scent of sorrow, of desperation. But now Catherine saw the child beneath the rage, the girl no one protected, the girl everyone dismissed. She lit a candle and placed it beside the book. "You can rest now," she whispered. Weeks passed. Molly stopped talking in her sleep. She no longer stared into corners, but one thing hadn't changed. She still hummed the lullaby. Catherine asked her again gently, "Where did you learn that tune?" "I told you, you used to sing it." "No, sweetie, I didn't." Molly tilted her head. "Then maybe it's just mine now." Catherine didn't press further. Some memories weren't hers to own. That summer, Molly learned to swim. She made a friend, a boy named Everett with freckles and a loud laugh. They built forts out of pine branches and picked blackberries until their fingers stained. One evening, Catherine watched her daughter sleep. Her hair curled across the pillow, one arm draped across a stuffed rabbit. She looked like any child. But Catherine knew better. She knew what it meant to come back from the edge of something nameless, what it cost, what it left behind. She walked to the closet and opened the small safe where she kept the tape recorder, the one that once held Sarah's voice. She hadn't touched it in months. She pressed play. Static. Nothing. Then a crackle, a hum. Two voices, one high and young, the other lower, in sync. She shut it off. Some wounds, she reminded herself, weren't meant to close completely. Catherine couldn't stop thinking about the tape, that hum, those two voices blending like threads in the same fabric. One part of her told her to throw it away, to erase it, bury it, forget it ever existed, but another part needed answers. That night, after Molly went to sleep, Catherine took the tape recorder to the garage. She closed the door, drew the blinds, and sat in silence. She pressed play. The static began, then the humming. A lullaby, faint and distant, like it was traveling through water. Then the voice came again, Molly's, and another. Not Sarah's voice exactly, but older, warmer, almost maternal. Catherine pressed pause. Her hands shook. She rewound. This time she heard words. Don't forget me. Her own voice, but distorted, slowed. Then Molly's again. I remember. I always will. Catherine turned off the tape and sat back. It wasn't Sarah. It was her. A future echo, maybe, or a moment trapped between worlds. The thought chilled her more than ghosts ever had. The next day she received a phone call. Mrs. Turney had passed away in her sleep. No pain, no warning, just gone. The obituary was short. No family, no services. No requests. But one detail stood out. She'd left instructions for her mirror to be buried with her. Catherine called the funeral home. The man on the phone hesitated. We honored her wishes, but after we placed the mirror in the coffin, it cracked. Right down the center. Did you hear anything? She asked, barely breathing. A pause. Then, yes, a sound like wind, inside the chapel. But there were no windows open. That night, Catherine dreamed of a hallway full of mirrors. Each one reflected something different. One showed Molly laughing. One showed Catherine herself, older, alone. And one showed a little girl with long dark hair, standing in a burned dress, staring back. Catherine woke, gasping, her heart thundering. In the morning she found the diary had fallen from its shelf. The final page was open. I'm not gone, I'm just waiting. She hadn't written that. No one had. But it was in Sarah's handwriting. She burned the diary that day, watched every page curl and blacken, let the smoke rise until there was nothing left but ash. Still that night, Molly woke crying. She said goodbye, she sobbed into Catherine's arms, but she said she'd come back if I forget her. You won't, Catherine whispered. You never will. Molly nodded and fell asleep again, and in the stillness, Catherine listened. But the house was silent. For now. Years passed. Time softened the edges of memory, but it never erased them. Catherine grew older, quieter, her hair silvered. Her voice took on a gentleness it once didn't have. The world outside changed, but inside her one truth remained fixed. Some reflections don't fade. Molly turned 16 the summer the birds returned early. She was tall now, thoughtful, eyes always half lost in dreams. She wrote stories in a notebook with a green leather cover. Always fiction, she said. But Catherine recognized the shadows between the lines. They're just imaginary, Molly told her one afternoon, showing her a page filled with looping script. Catherine smiled. So was Sarah once. Molly paused, then nodded. I remember. And she did. Not all of it, but enough. They never spoke of the cellar again, or the mirror room, or the day Mark disappeared into the glass. His name was framed above the fireplace between two candles. Catherine lit them every Sunday, one for grief, one for gratitude. They lived quietly, simply. Catherine tended a garden, read aloud before bed. Molly volunteered at the library. They didn't fear the dark anymore, but they didn't welcome it either. They simply walked through it with open eyes. But the past is never truly past. One autumn afternoon, a neighbor's child came by to return a borrowed book. Her name was Lila, 7 years old, talkative. She held up a sheet of paper. "I drew her," she said proudly. Catherine blinked. "Who?" "My friend. She comes when I'm sad." The drawing was crude, 2 stick figures, one with long dark hair and black circles for eyes. Molly came to the door behind her. The child beamed. "She said you'd know her." Molly stared at the drawing. Her face went still. Catherine gently touched the child's shoulder. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very creative." Lila skipped away. That night, Molly stood at the mirror in her bedroom. Just a normal mirror, oval, small, harmless. She stared for a long time, then whispered, "I didn't forget." The reflection blinked, but only once. Catherine sat at her desk that evening, writing in a new diary. This one was hers alone. She wrote of grief, of guilt, of things passed between mothers and daughters. She ended with one line: "Some echoes wait, but not all are cruel. To those who followed this journey, who've listened closely, you now carry her story too. Don't let it be forgotten." And if you want more true horror stories like this one, be sure to subscribe. Click the video on your screen now to discover another chilling tale you won't believe is real.